Okay, guys. There's only a few of us in this workshop, so if a few more people come on board, I might quickly revisit to tell people to turn the microphones and stuff on. So welcome to this workshop for this afternoon. It's due to last 60 minutes. It might run a bit shorter than that. Just for the start of it, if you can make sure your microphones are muted. A reminder that all the workshops are recorded. They'll be uploaded afterwards as well. So if you're not in something else you want to see right now, you can watch them later on as well. And anything that is spoken about in this workshop will be uploaded to the Active Partnership website. Feel free to use the chat on the side as we go through if you want to use that as a reminder for yourselves as well, so we can always revisit those questions towards the end as well. So this workshop is around the Sport England Teacher Training Project. So that was aimed at secondary schools. I know we did have a couple of primary schools signed up to that, but they can still see how that programme worked. So Sport England, wanted everyone in England, regardless of age, background, level of ability, to engage with physical activity. Now, some of the stuff that especially myself will touch upon in my presentation, Jane might have visited earlier if you watched the opening keynote. I will then hand over to Jess, and Jess is going to go through some case studies and a few other bits along there as well, and I'll let her explain the part that she's going to do. So from the outcomes of this, is to understand the Sport England Teacher Training Programme from phase 1, to gain insight into those national headline figures. Like I said, Jane might have visited them already. And then the importance of physical activity and the evidence to support this. And hopefully, you'll get some outcomes from this that, might help any discussions in school at the moment with your physical activity, PE and school sport. So currently, there's 7 million children from 5 to 15 across England not doing the recommended daily amount of physical activity. So as I'm sure everyone's aware, that's 60 minutes of activity every day. So that's low, medium, high levels of activity. The Sport England training was to reinforce the relevance and importance of PE in school sport, and trying to reach some of those wider outcomes in school as well. So confidence, attendance, behaviour. And there was 2 teaching schools in Cornwall that worked with their own cluster of schools with that. So ours was Applied Minds and Cornwall Teaching School that Jess will go through after this part. So some of the summary of some of the key findings. I know Jane went through this in the physical activity. I think it's probably a bit blurry in there. And sort of the Active Live survey, is a survey that is across the country and gets a real sample of where people are at the time. And we know that the physical literacy children, and with those 5 key elements, enjoyment, confidence, understanding, knowledge, competence, each one of those is getting the young people more active, and it presents some of the elements for them that will make for the rest of their lives. What stops the least active pupils from being physically active is that lack of confidence, lack of time, lack of schoolwork. And I know some of the surveys that we did is with our schools, that is what some of the pupils will come back with. And sometimes that shocks some of the teachers, when they said, schoolwork is a barrier for them, and having that lack of time after school, even though that we can look and see how much, how much schoolwork they could do, but maybe it's overcoming those barriers and sort of changing their mindsets with that. We also had, why children find activity, what are the benefits from it? They love being active, they love having fun, they love being with friends and feeling good. And I know when we did some of the surveys in some of our schools, that they very much enjoyed PE lessons a lot more when they got to work with people that they're familiar with, people of their own abilities, and that sort of gave them the confidence to take part more. And they felt very much on the back foot if they were with people that they thought were more advanced at sport than them, or they weren't able to take part with their friends. So this is some of the data from last year, which showed significant improvements from the 2017-18 data. And I know that Jane sort of showed this slide earlier. So, you know, a third of our children are less active or not less than 30 minutes active a day. And just under 50% of us are meeting that 60 minutes of physical activity a day. This is a map that they had on the Sport England website, so you can see across the country the general picture of that physical activity. And this insight, you know, tells us from, you know, different levels and a bit of an insight. You can see in the southwest, obviously, that activity is slightly improved than the rest of the country, but it's still nowhere near that 60 minutes a day. If my next slide lies. So with some of the surveys that we did, this is just a quick snapshot of some of the stuff that we were able to look at. So we surveyed the whole year group across all year groups, across all of the schools, and it just gave us little snapshots. This is just one little bit that we could look in, and it was the levels of physical activity in non-lesson time. So how much activity they're doing outside of school, what percentages, able to compare year groups. And we would sometimes see that slight drop off of the higher end activity across the year groups. And we also saw that, you know, the importance of physical mindset of some of those pupils sometimes dropped off through school and how much they enjoyed it. So we worked with some of our schools, especially, to find ways of reinvigorating that confidence in those lessons. So when they're year 10, 11, why is it that they might be sort of dropping away from that physical activity? Is it something that we need to change the offer? Is it the way that we deliver their lessons? Is it because, you know, personally in our own school that, you know, we accreditate all children, so all of them do a PE qualification, so maybe that pressure of them having to perform in sport as well was that added pressure there as well. Just going to move on to a little video which I hope works. Some of you might have seen it before, but it was just a way I thought to revisit that importance of physical activity, and especially since we've got some primary delegates here as well. And I know earlier we talked about that physical literacy, and Jane sort of highlighted that. I've seen this video before, but just that importance of making sure that we're physically literate at a young age, so then when we do get to that secondary school level, that they still have those you know, those key physical literacy skills that is enabling them to enjoy physical activity as well. So hopefully this works.
Our bodies are more or less the same as those of our forefathers, the hunter-gatherers. Industrial and technological revolutions happened so fast that our bodies haven't been able to catch up. We live in a world where we can spend all day not moving, and this impacts on our emotional and physical well-being. The Department of Health recommends that children do at least 60 minutes of physical activity every day. But well over half of the UK's children aged between 5 and 15 don't achieve this.
Neil, I think it's playing voiceover, but it's not actually playing the video. Sorry.
Right, let me stop that. Let me see if it works this way around. So if I could... tried embedding that as well, so I thought it would work, but typically in fashion. Go, technical difficulties. And we had a little run through this as well, so I'm not sure it won't work now, but it did earlier. I'll revisit the slide, and I'll tell you what, we will, hopefully when that loads back up, I will share this anyway at the end so people can have a look at that, that video separately. Okay, so I'll leave the video there so we don't just get listened to with that video. So the Sport England research shows us that helping those young people get active during the school time plays a vital role, especially at the moment with all that missed work that they might have had in the summer for some schools compared to others, and with the pandemic going on as well, and how much that can support their mental health. When schools were closed, we know that children found it harder to get active and did less activity than they normally would. There were some benefits that come out to that. We'll visit in a minute with families and things. But the benefits of those students being safely active, has never been more important than now. The activity levels of many young children and young people have reduced significantly from pre-lockdown, even returning to school now with extracurricular clubs and all not sort of taking place, and now especially with community sport stopping for the time being. We also sort of that students who are active report, those high levels of happiness and self-worth as well with that from the survey responses. 92% of the teachers and 90% of those children, now report that the physical activity, and they can see the improvement in their mental and physical health. And that physical activity has a potential to reduce that stress, anxiety, providing that routine and structure. And those students and staff, now find that there's more importance on that being physically active. And it's not saying that they didn't necessarily before, but maybe that now is a time for us that we find maybe that's something that we can work on as well. And that importance of that physical activity for our mental health, our well-being, and hopefully moving forwards that we can sort of build upon that basis as well. So some of the response back in April showed us that again 62% of adults now realise that importance from before COVID of physical activity. The majority of children have continued to do something to stay active during that time. Although, as Jane said earlier, that physical activity level dropped, we still found that more people were doing activity together and families, and hopefully that's maybe something that we can build upon in the future as well. And there was one benefit with girls as well, saying they were 16% more active, that more than normal during that time as well. But 71% of those children have more active with their family in those recent months. So that was back in sort of April, May time, that those families were maybe doing a bit of physical activity together. And it's something that we don't really get to touch upon in that school setting, but definitely maybe a way to overcome some of those barriers of physical activity there as well. I think that's pretty much it for me. I did skip over a lot of those things and probably rambled on a little bit there, but just because I didn't want to touch upon some of the stuff that Jane had already touched upon previously with those findings that they had from the Active Lives survey. We'll revisit sort of later on as well some of the stuff that we implemented with our schools and how we look to overcome some of those barriers. So Jess, I will try and unshare my screen for you.
Fabulous, thanks Neil. So as Neil said earlier, that in phase 1 of the teacher training project from Sport England, Cornwall Teaching School and Applied Minds were asked to roll out the first phase of this project. The project has gone through, we're actually currently on the 5th phase, and the whole idea is to be able to basically ensure that all secondary schools have this funding and have 2 teachers trained in every single school. So in terms of the context, well, I'm just sharing my slide. I just want to say to all of you that the attitudes and behaviours information that Neil was talking about is actually part of the largest study on physical activity and physical education in Europe. So from phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4, they basically looked at 42,000 students' perceptions from all of the questionnaires, and also from about 5,000 staff. So it's really actually showing us lots of different insights from the local perspective in terms of what Cornwall Teaching School found with 18 secondary schools. I would just like to say that one of the biggest things that we identified was a disparity between what the staff thought, and this was 2 years ago nearly now, what the staff thought in terms of academic achievement and its impact, and what the students thought. And you can just see there on figure 1 that actually that's quite a difference. There's obviously no statistical difference in it, but it's something that needs to be flagged. And I think that, as Neil was talking about the perception of this, the profile is raising higher due to COVID-19, and it's really nicely, Neil, linked in what's happened during COVID and what's sort of the implications to physical activity and physical education within schools. So I think hopefully when we get the data back from the impact, and also for phase 5 data, this could be different in Cornwall, because actually a lot of work over the last 2 years has taken place to bring everybody up. And those of you that are obviously looking at Ofsted and inspection framework, that's really important, because the deep dive approach looks at that whole methodology of leader, student and staff, and so that connection is really important. So some of the other things that we found about that we needed to work on, and we worked with our schools, was curriculum time for PE. Some schools didn't keep the 2 hours, and that was something we needed to work on with them. Engagement of changes of approach for PE. So actually looking at how do we work with them to be innovative with their curriculum time. Also looking at the complexity of that whole school approach, because actually how else can you support young people and staff to be active and that whole sort of 30 minutes in the school time and 30 minutes outside? And then looking at that time was really when Neil and I both took on and worked with this project. It was really a real transition in terms of the Ofsted framework. And so a lot of the more time than I thought actually went on to helping schools working with their curriculums because of the framework, but also looking and getting to identify personal development judgments and how that structure was happening. And that came from the schools themselves. Because realistically, this project was led by the schools. It's school-led. It's not like any other Sport England project that I've ever completed. So there was lots of different projects working with the school. And one of the other key things that came across from all 18 head teachers in phase 1 for our Cornwall Teaching School was there are a lot of projects going on in schools, and can you help map them, bring them together so that we know exactly what support is there in the community for our young people? So they were some of the governing sort of targets for it. So what we did was we used a sort of predominantly a 3-tiered approach. So we use specialist leaders in education to work on curriculum time with heads of PE to really help them focus on pedagogical practice. And it could be, for example, working with NQTs, but it could also be working on applying some of the information that they've gained, such as game sense, in our workshops that we delivered across 3 hub sites of Penwith, Truro and Callywyth. And that was really, how do you make your physical activity lessons, your physical education lessons more active by still ensuring the development of physical literacy, like Neil said, that's a real massive importance, but also to ensure that you are developing the ability of young people to be able to problem solve, work together, cooperate, and both performance sport and participation sport for the first time are on the same page through this game sense problem solving activity work. So the specialist leaders in education also help with that. But I will say, and I'll go back to it, that realistically the majority of the time was working with heads of PE on their curriculum, because that was the key moment in time to actually that they needed that help, and actually it worked really well, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So the final sort of tier, apart from those centralised workshops, was something very specific in the school. And that really depended upon the school and what their need was. Unfortunately, I think Neil and I both would have said we'd like more funding for this, and then we could have done potentially more with it. But realistically, linking to other projects and other work has really been instrumental. Because the key thing here is the school needs to drive it, and the school drove lots of different things because they used their survey data. One school even used their data when they were Ofsteded, and it was really helpful to show the attitudes and behaviours in terms of where their students thought very positively of their wellbeing approach. So they had made that ethos shift, and they were able to show it in that data, which is fantastic. And also, obviously, I went over to every single school and had site visits. We developed, due to COVID, we developed online resources to support the schools and gave them ways and structures. So for you, those of you that are primary schools here, that hopefully one of the key messages you'll be able to take across and back to your schools is actually reviewing your school. And I'll go through the principles that I kind of used to do that and to help the school. And so the school basically themselves looked at raising the importance of PE within the school and how to create this whole school approach. So touched on it there. If you haven't seen the Public Health England updated work on increasing physical activity levels in schools and colleges, I've put a hyperlink in the presentation, so it will take you straight to that document. But basically, these are the key 8 principles. And for me, it was part of a review document, a monitoring and evaluation document that I worked through when I went on site visits with the school. And that is being given in terms of sustainability to what they call now Active Cornwall, and they're putting that into their new time to move online tool and support for schools in Cornwall. So develop and deliver, I'm sure you can read this, but develop and deliver multi-component interventions. So it can't just be one approach. And I've got Ofsted up there and the curriculum inspection framework, but realistically, in terms of like equality and diversity, that's the same thing. It needs to be embedded across the school, not tokenistic. And actually, one of the key things I think that Neil and I probably both found was that there's lots of good practice and pockets of good practice within a school. One of the key things is then to open up that wider practice and get parts of the school knowing what they're doing, and so that communication happens top down, left, right, and basically then the whole school can celebrate it, and it's giving them that structure and helping them to be able to be very vocal and use how health and wellbeing is helping their school. So that's something that I kind of came across, and I'm sure Neil did too. Neil, do you want to nod? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, good. And basically, CPD of skilled workforce, that's what this project was all about. We couldn't do anything else other than CPD of staff and engage with student voice. We did that from the beginning, and I personally worked with some of the schools specifically to create a student body, not just about performance sport, but actually non-responders to exercise, get them to try to be the advocates for other people in their school and have a structure about what types of activities in extra time, like before school, after school, that they could. And that worked really well, because you also need to think about the environment. So some schools in my 18 really had issues with the facilities, and working with them to understand what types of funding they could have to help develop them. It was something else that the project actually brought to, because it was done on need and it was specific to certain schools. Offering choice and variety. Everybody needs that choice if we're trying to inspire them and to get them that have that angle and that opportunity. So all of those things, embed curriculum, teaching and learning, talked about before. Active travel, I kind of left that to Sustrans, but I basically linked them into the school, and I also linked Healthy Cornwalls into the schools. So that's one of the ones I sort of did, but not really. I let the experts take that one. And then embedding monitoring and evaluation. While doing this project, they actually monitored and evaluated their own school, and hence now we've created a system to help others. So what does all that mean? And for people listening, what can you take away? And that's, hand on heart, Neil and I could have just stood here for an hour and talked about lots of different things, but I've just tried to pick out some examples. And key things is where schools had narrowed their curriculum and there was 75 minutes a week, and that was it for 2 weeks in classes. There's certain schools there's about 6 out of my 18 that really looked at their curriculum, the senior leaders, the head teachers, and real made a shift change. And whether it was that they increased the time on their curriculum or they shared good practice across their trusts, for example, St Ives have this fantastic Be Inspired programme, which then got rolled out to Cape Cornwall, or Hale. They looked at theirs and they actually put increased time to physical activity, and they looked at the PHSE curriculum and saw how they could work it to ensure that more kids were active for longer. So there's lots of different ways they did it, but they did it right for their school, and that came from a top-down approach. What other things they sort of did, which I really like in terms of advocacy, was the development of breakfast clubs. Penryn's got 400 students at the moment through COVID being active before school, after school. It's amazing to hear. It's obviously needed, like Neil was saying. And then active tutor times. I've basically put schools down that I know, don't mind me saying things, but lots of them went for active tutor times. It's hard in the rain, and having videos and activities is one of the key things that sharing good practice is actually quite an important point, but that definitely did work. And it's really interesting, the schools that led and used non-PE teachers to lead that really did well in engaging all teachers. So it's thinking about the wider approach, not just down through PE and training other staff. Now, I can use Brannell because they want me to talk about this, but they've got a brand new curriculum for year 7, year 8, which basically, well, I think year 7, that basically goes and transcends all areas. And this opportunity for them to put projects in for young people to be active in lots of different areas, so increasing the physical activity times. And this linked into their work with Youth Sports Trust, and they did a big showcase and raising the profile of girls and being more active, because we know that they're more, unfortunately, they have greater barriers to participation. So they really inspired and got non-sporty young ladies to be able to inspire other non-responders to exercise. And that was a really good day, and really has helped because it aligned with their whole school values. And then realistically, the other thing is about how do we ensure that school club link, and there's lots of different ones, and hand on heart, like Penrice, they do Penrice Plus. All children have an opportunity to do different types of clubs and different activities. So it was actually linking what's outside to inside, and as Neil says, at this precise moment in time, that's not necessarily as easy as it once was, and we are going to have to think about how else can we do that once we get through this difficult time. So I have picked key examples for you, and Falmouth have very kindly said that I can talk about this. This was one of, as you are aware from what I said at the beginning, is one of the key elements was for me to try and tie up these projects. I found that quite difficult, but one of the ways I did it, and I used it as good practice through, is that I worked with Falmouth on a CPD morning to develop and increase staff and student wellbeing. And it was all focused on that. I facilitate it, talk to them about it, I linked them. I got them working with the Head Start a bit more, and also I, through this project, got lecturers and deliverers to help with this morning. But the school took it, the deputy leader delivered the keynote, and the physics lecturer talked about active classrooms and how he uses it in his active classrooms. So they led from the front. And one of the key things for me, they looked at green gym, so the outside environment. They looked at body image. They did healthy workshops on theory and practice on staff and student wellbeing. And they used as a sort of measurement tool the 5 ways to wellbeing at the start of the morning and at the end of the morning. And it was so highly positive with staff that they were focusing on their students' wellbeing, but also their own, and actually what it meant for them, that I was really chuffed. And this is the way that then, hence why we're working on, and we would have had, but we postponed it, a county-wide health and wellbeing conference. Okay, so I'll come back to that later, but this is where it came from. So Falmouth basically took in charge of that. And from that green gym, Charlotte McCrill worked with Falmouth School to look at their outdoor area, and over the summer put their own funding in to have a fully accessible orienteering course, which was cross-curricular, to increase opportunities during this COVID times. And hence, as you're all aware, that realistically that is one way it's been a little bit easier to not have so many health and safety and risk assessment issues. So what they found, and what I've got back from Christy, from the head of PE from Falmouth, is that basically after that, both staff and student wellbeing is now at the core focus of the school, which is amazing. And they have a health and wellbeing lead, and that lead person takes ideas from the staff and the students to SLT in terms of trying to make improvements and working on that communication. In the last lockdown, the lead basically developed newsletters so that people had things to do on each week to try and help them. They've opened up a gym membership on their own facilities on their school site for them to be able to have staff access and to do a Friday night soccer, and also to look at them in terms of running wellbeing sessions. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. They've also got a wellbeing hub, and they now have that full accessible outdoor green gym, and they're putting in for a cycle track. So that to me is really good. And the biggest thing sustainability wise is that yes, we're out of Falmouth now, but it's going to carry on because they have a clear link and a clear lead with Healthy Cornwall Head Start, and they are focusing on one of those principles of the whole school approach, which is they're out different environments, and then they've increased the capacity and the opportunity for their students, and they've actually had progression in terms of their curriculum in Ofsted to be able to show and ensure that young people at Falmouth School value PE, sport and physical activity. So that was one of my key ones to show and share with you. Curriculum development, as Neil and I both said, really important. I would say all 18 of our schools have reviewed their curriculum and work to treat, and that's not just with us, but that's with Ofsted Guidance, Youth Sports Trust, because they work across the county as well. But it's actually, what does it mean to them? I personally would say that there's been a paradigm shift. So people's thinking has changed about how they use curriculum. Progression is obviously something that's very key because of Ofsted, but metacognition and linking things for students and being able to have that mastery approach, and then how you teach that within. One of the key workshops for me that I delivered to the heads of PE, and I kept this one focused just on the heads of PE, I didn't offer it wider than those 18, was curriculum alignment. And so I talked from the curriculum theory about how do you structure it. All right, the SLEs were trained by AFP and basically the guy that wrote the national curriculum. So that was quite handy as well in terms of them helping those heads of PE. So it allowed creativity, it allowed people to be able to think about what's important, and it really gave, you know, heads of PE that opportunity to have that Q&A discussion. And when they're in the workshops with myself, for example, I gave them time at the end to actually work together and to discuss their curriculums. And I think sometimes that brain space was absolutely vital for them to be able to talk to someone externally, to think about so many different things that were being put at them at that time. And I'm really chuffed and really pleased with what the results have been. As you can see, my example there is that basically being able to discuss with an external idea about their thoughts about curriculum requirements is really good. So the SLEs for me was one of the key things within the curriculum, which was a focus within our project, but also the project nationally. So just an example, Roseland basically realigned their curriculum. They did it with the Olympic values, and they have curriculumly aligned. So for example, learning outcomes would be linked to determination, extracurricular participation, physical activity, respect. All right, so different people had different ideas. But what I would just quickly do, and I'm going to have to sort of jig, which is going to be quite fun, so wish me luck, is basically leave that one alone and then just show you, and because I keep talking about progression, and I just thought to myself that it's really important to do that. Penryn, and don't get me wrong, there's like Bodmin, there's loads of other schools that have done this as well. Weybridge, they've all really worked hard on this, but just because I'd asked, Richard sent this to me, so I actually had something. So this is to show you, and for those primary schools in the audience, you can see that it goes all the way from the bottom. So if you're a multi-academy trust, I was in a lovely Ofsted discussion about initial teacher training as a pilot. I know one of the key things that the head inspector said to me was, realistically, with maths now, you're going to look at progression all the way from year 3 or key stage 1 all the way up to whatever end your mat finishes. So actually, should we be looking, the education white paper tells us to look at a key stage before and a key stage after. So hopefully for Penryn's context, they've done that. They've looked at the primary school key stage 2 before then, they've gone all the way to key stage 1. But I know I'm not allowed to ask questions, but I can't help myself. What do you notice from this? Okay, so do you think equality and diversity is on the side, or do you think it's linked in? You know, one of the key things for me when I saw this, I was very happy because it is central to the progression of the student. Will the student know? Will the staff know? Will the senior leaders know? Will the parents know where these students are next and what opportunities are there for them? And that's what this does. All right. And I'm sure in your own schools, you've got something similar than this, because as I said, that was a while ago now, and everyone's moved forward on this new common inspection framework. So, but these were the things that basically the SLEs and the workshops help to develop and help to present. They've got value cards, all that sort of things, lots of different things, but hopefully that gives you some visualization of what I'm actually talking about. Okay, so in terms of examples then, the final elements for me are within the classroom. So it is very important for teachers, okay, heads of PE, to be able to give and focus about what do they want from their teachers, and have a clear guide. So one of the key things that right from the start, after I spoke to the heads of PEs in the launch events, we talked about how do we improve physical activity levels and activity levels within lessons. And, you know, at that time, it was that joined approach between performance and participation with game sense. So it was something that we definitely focused on. We will be doing more of these, but basically they were the highest attended in terms of our workshops, were our game sense ones. And it was really lovely to see the feedback from teachers that they were going to put this into their practice, because actually they could see where it made sense and where it linked to their questioning of the students, where it linked to their delivery, and where it linked to how they work as a PE department. So that was absolutely fabulous. And it is one of those things that you can do it in however way you want to do, and you can tailor it backwards and forwards to ensure that you teach the top and scaffold down. So that's fantastic. Some schools still had levels within their assessments, and that was identified out of monitoring and evaluation. So that was a process for them and an awareness raising for senior leaders. And it happened that actually assessment for numbers and levels got taken out of their schools, and a more holistic approach to assessment that matched the new curriculum and matched their sort of pedagogical approach. And that worked really well. And one of the key things that I think I've seen as a driver to help participation was when assessment and the holistic assessment of an individual was linked to outside clubs and engagement and collaboration and working with others. So this was absolutely great to see, and it was a thing that obviously I sent across to the other heads of PEs, but realistically, it's however the school wants to do it. And I think the thing is that just remembering in terms of the schools, that's how they looked at it, and that's what they worked on, is that assessment is the impact that Ofsted will be looking at, and it measures their intent of what they're trying to do with their curriculum. So now the impact and the intent match the curriculum that they've developed, which is great. So they're my sort of overview and sort of like examples, but one of the things that links to research that I was quite adamant about, and we've done it once, we're going to do it again in phase 5 when we get to it next year, January, is that in that research I told you about, the 8 principles, Sheffield Hallam and up north basically some researchers have taken that and looked at what is the biggest impact of all of those different approaches in a school to increase participation. And what they found is active classrooms. So if you have got 2 hours of PE in your curriculum each week and everyone's doing that, it's fantastic. But actually, if people are active and their pedagogical delivery style includes active classrooms, and it can literally be as easy as everyone stand up and then everybody sit down, okay, when you're doing questioning techniques, it really does increase the physical activity and hence the cognitive development of our young people, the emotional and well-being feeling that has come out of all the new research that has stated that that is why we need to keep our kids physically active. So that to me is something Youth Sports Trust have done some workshops on for us, but we're going to do it again in the next phase because I think it's so important. So what does that mean in the next phase? What it means is that currently we're in transition. Cornwall Teaching School has been successful because everybody in Cornwall wanted to work together. So the schools that were not included in Mounts Bay Applied Minds and Cornwall Teaching School, all of them, bar one school and another school which has gone with the teaching school in Devon, which is fair enough, basically are now in phase 5. We are in the intent phase of that. They have changed the project because they've gone from phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're in 5. They're going to do one more phase and that's it. But basically, one of the things I'd just like to flag is that because all of the schools in Cornwall like to work together, Sport England are very happy that actually the majority of schools in Cornwall, if not all of them, will have gone through this and had this funding in Cornwall. So I think it's something that really to say thank you to all the schools that have worked with us and wanted to work together to say that. So what's the transition? We've got Dr. Jim Rogers, who is the Southwest Development Officer realistically for teaching schools all alliance across the Southwest, and he has a PE background and he is amazing. And basically he's got some online events happening on staff wellbeing and student wellbeing in the next couple of weeks. They are free and anyone is open. You can all join it and complete it if you want. You just need to email Emma from Cornwall Teaching School to book on. So those things are there for you. All of those workshops that I was talking to you about, the resources, they're all on our Cornwall Teaching School's digital campus site. When we had to go remote, we set up an external platform on Truro and Penworth College's website so that you can create your own account and then access Cornwall Teaching School's digital campus site. So on this presentation, there is a link to it, and Tim will be sending a how-to guide of how to log on to that site. And in there's Jim's previous videos, the work he's completed on COVID and transition and looking at metacognition and actually our everyday practices and how we can help within COVID and well-being. And there's also the active classrooms. Lewis from Active Cornwall did a youth personalities workshop, so all that stuff from Sport England's there. So if you want any of those types of information, they're on that website. Access them and use them to help facilitate your school and review your school. And then realistically, what's going to happen from here on in, we've got a launch event of phase 5 next week. Woohoo! And from that, there will be, because obviously the 18 work with the whole of Cornwall, so the 5 will be working with the whole of Cornwall. But there will be workshop activities, whether that's online or offline, we will see and we will find out. But I have put everything back apart from these online sessions until after Christmas. So we can see, because I've got some Game Sense ones ready to go, and I would like to do that. So fingers crossed that we're there. I will be doing a curriculum alignment, and worst case, I can do that online. That's not a problem. A lot of the feeling has come from the heads of PE from the meeting, for the county meeting in July, is working with non-responders to exercise. So those types of workshops will be happening. And then, because I've changed slightly the project, is that I've saw from going up to phase 5's launch event for Sport England that we are able to work with national governing bodies and fund national governing bodies. Then basically, because I'll be able to help with the 5, there should be reduced rates of national governing body qualifications for other schools. Now, the idea for that is like orienteering, taekwondo, different types of national governing bodies that would be able to then increase the offer for our PE teachers to be able to help facilitate, or for staff that want to do after school clubs, etc., that type of stuff. I've also been able to gain other funding because I realised that with the 5 schools, it's minimal. So I've been able to get success sort of ESF funding, and we will be able to do roughly about six masterclasses, because one of the things, like strength, I'm sure Neil will talk about this in a minute, I think we talked about this before, is that fit, and you're not allowed to call it CrossFit, but basically physical activity through strength conditioning and exercise to music, the health related elements, CPD for teachers, I'm being asked for, we've been asked for by those 5 schools. So realistically, I've been able to get masterclasses from Truro College's HE deliverers to be able to help facilitate that. All right, so I don't know what it's going to look like, and we're developing those, but they will be on offer. So that's for anyone. So I thought that could be quite good. Case studies are being developed to go into the Time to Move online platform. And then, as I said, we've got the monitoring and evaluation. But basically, what I would say is that the national insight is one of the key things that I forgot to say, and I will say now, from those surveys, is there is a strong relationship between the attitudes and behaviours of staff and whether or not students are active. And if the attitude of the staff is that they understand the importance of wellbeing and physical activity, what the 42,000 students and 5,000 staff research has found is that there is a strong relationship that children are active. So it doesn't matter necessarily if the staff member themselves is active or not active. If that attitude is a very positive thing, then there will be an impact. There is no impact between senior leaders from that research, and there's no relationship between senior leaders and students' participation or attitude to sport, PE and physical activity. But the key thing that I found very, very interesting is that there is a very strong relationship between senior leaders and staff. So therefore, there is an indirect relationship with that, because there will be an impact on students through the staff. So it just shows, and it goes back for me to highlight the importance of a whole school approach. All right, so I'm going to be quiet now because I think I have talked for quite a long time. I've just left my contact details on that, and I've left Emma Williams, who basically organises everything for Cornwall Teaching School, and hand over to Neil and myself just to take any questions. And I know I've talked quite a lot and quite quickly, but hopefully that's given you some insight and some examples and some ways to help you and your school to raise the profile and to really have this holistic approach to sport, PE and physical activity.
Just ping any questions in the group chat if anyone's got any. Just to summarise on my part, as Jess went through, this project is very much around the purpose, rationale, some insight, and it was quite interesting that both of our projects, very much had the same sort of outcomes and the same input from the teachers there and the heads of PE, very much around that time, having those days together, being able to design, talk about the curriculum, other ideas that people have, incorporate active tutor times and active lessons and stuff, and very much that progression as well. I know sort of in RMAT that we have key concepts, so they work from primary school all the way up to the end of the school life in secondary school, and we've very much got these key concepts that work, so they almost building blocks through that progression across the year group. So we're not just teaching physical activity, we're teaching those key concepts, but using physical activity as that driver. And very much as well, what come to the table a lot was alternative provision. What do we do when teaching the same sports and things in school? And I know some of our schools use some alternative sports there as well to try and engage some of those less active pupils, where there's a bit more of a level playing field. So we had some kinball activities. If people haven't seen that, it's very much a team game where they have to work together and they have to communicate to be able to take part in that. It's basically almost like a giant blow up Swiss ball type thing that you kind of throw around, a bit of volleyball element to it, but it was very much having some sports as well that no one else can necessarily excel in because they wouldn't have necessarily done it before. And like Jess said as well, the staff mindset, I think even since COVID, I think a lot of teachers, even speaking to PE teachers sometimes, that say, they don't have the time to be physically active outside of school anymore. Well, actually, I think people kind of reassess that during lockdown and other times. And, everyone can make 20 minutes during their day to be physically active, whether it's going out for a walk, doing workouts at home, and as soon as teachers kind of change their mindsets with that as well. And that's PE teachers as well that maybe have dropped away from physical activity themselves, that, you know, they can start inspiring the younger people to get active and you know, lifelong physical activity with that as well.
One of the things that I suppose I haven't mentioned, but just one of the things that I think to yourselves, just ask yourselves structurally wise, I mean, in education terms, we call it architectures of practice, but do you have a lead governor on health and wellbeing? Is there a lead governor in your school? If not, is there one on personal development? And if you've got that structure, one of the things that we found with the outside agencies especially is if they have a really good relationship with someone as a deputy head or even a head of PE or a head of PHSE, if that person leaves, then that relationship goes. And then sometimes that person, when they go to a new school, they don't even have the same job role, so they don't even get it in the new school. So if you have a reporting processing system, then to a governor, then actually that relationship will continue because the school has to report back to that governor. So it's just something that if you're trying to raise the profile but also allow processes in place to help young people, then that's just something I forgot that I thought I would flag as a top tip. I'm really happy to hear that. I think is it Amy that from Penrice you want to put some staff on? Yes, because you've got loads of different staff all helping in terms of Penrice Plus. Brilliant. If you don't mind dropping me an email, I don't think I've got your email, Amy, but I have obviously got the school's ones, then we will link you in as much as possible.
Yeah.
What do we know? What do we know from the? If I missed that bit.
I can't see anything else there.
Okay.
I know CPD on strength and conditioning and alternative sports provisions were something that ours highlighted as well. And just before we hit lockdown, we had a CPD with those classes, because a lot of schools and a lot of teachers use those videos and online things, and some great areas where some girls that are inactive but they really like just going into the classroom and doing dance, watching videos, but it was given the teacher a general knowledge, so when they put those videos on, that they can help support there as well. They didn't feel that it was something they didn't, whether it was Zumba or whatever it was, that they just had that a little bit of 30 minutes of CPD with different elements so they could piece it all together. But I haven't got anything else from my part. I don't think there's any questions in the chat. Jess, have you got anything else that you want to?
I suppose realistic, I would just like to say thank you, because this is something that thank you very much for coming and listening today. And if you can spread it back to your schools, you've got stuff there from Applied Minds and from Cornwall Teaching School that you should be able to use back and question. And sustainability wise, there will be a health wellbeing conference in July, fingers crossed. I don't know how it's going to look. There will be also a review of the PHSE curriculum that you can get involved with. That's what I also found was really nice, is that the head teachers loved that we were doing that for them, but actually we also had then different members of staff, so it was great that the PHSE lead came, not necessarily the head of PE, so it all helped in terms of that alignment and that widening practice. So just talk and communicate within your school, and if you can take that back, that'd be fantastic. Obviously you have our details, and Neil and I more than happy to link in staff members to what we can and what's there. And I think it really is a celebrated thing that in Cornwall we do want to work together. That's not the same in other counties, I can tell you that right now. So if there's nothing else from Neil or I think it's a case of say thank you very much, and Rob Harrison can stop the recording.
Yeah, just next workshop, guys, is 2:15, so you've got an extra 5 minutes break than others, so you've got a 20-minute break now. You would have had those links sent through to your email address, so use that, or it's also on the template for today anyway. So check your emails for the next link, and thanks for coming along. Brill.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.